just the way David Lean uses color temperature. And if you look at Zhivago, Bridge on the River Kwai, and Lawrence of Arabia, one is in the jungle, one is in the desert, and one is in the snow. And I really believe he's drawn to creating a sense of an environment. You're never colder than you can be in Dr. Zhivago.
Tonya! Tonya!
No detail ever got past David. He had a wonderful eye for the set, and especially for the palette of the movie. It's bleak, but there are dramatic splashes of color.
Most of the color choices in the movie seem to be blues, blacks, grays, some whites, and a very deliberate use of red. Red for blood, red for the balalaika that belonged to Yuri's mother, red for that somewhat decadent restaurant, and most excitingly and disturbingly, the red dress that Lara wears. He sort of spins her in front of a mirror, and all you see is the dress. You can't even see her head.
Julie Christie's red dress, you know, the Scarlet Woman. And then you had these beautiful daffodils to denote the spring. And there's that gorgeous sunflower in the hospital after Lara is carried away in the caravan. And it's almost as if this flower is crying.
It's like a painting, but clearly it's also a symbol with a capital S if you're paying attention to the effects of her and their love.
When you've started work, you'll get a ration book.
I've always worked.
In terms of whether this is a political story, no, it's a story about, this love affair, but it does tell a lot of things about Russia in a very good way and the evolution of that revolution and what happened to Russia.
There was living space for 13 families in this one house.
Yes. Yes, this is a better arrangement, comrades. More just.
And you feel it, you feel the dispossessed. There's this mean woman who is a commissar with this very larcenous guy who's also a commissar.
Your attitude is noticed, you know? Oh, yes, it's been noticed.
And it's interesting, that process of Lean as a filmmaker deciding how to pare the book down. For instance, this entire sequence of Alec Guinness in his brother's apartment is done in a two-part style of dialogue. Narration, only narration coming from Alec Guinness.
He told me what he thought about the party, and I trembled for him.
And dialogue coming from Omar Sharif.
Well, of course, I can't approve this evening something you may do tomorrow.
He was walking about with a noose round his neck and didn't know.
It's a sequence where Alec Guinness never utters a word of sync dialogue. It's all narration, and it's all analysis. And Zhivago is talking nothing but dialogue.
Do you think it's personal, petit bourgeois, and self-indulgent?
I lied, but he believed me. And it struck me through to see that my opinion mattered.
It's a fantastic moment. I've never seen it in another movie. It's extraordinary.
David was the master of transitions. The most famous one in Dr. Zhivago is the montage with Lara's theme in full rhapsody. And we go from Zhivago sort of scratching at the window to looking out, field of daffodils, to a single daffodil to Julie Christie's face, and then the lovers reunited. And that's Dr. Zhivago.
People will always talk about Lean's scope, and that's true. His master shots, brilliant, the size of everything. But I give Robert Bolt and I give John Box, his production designer, a great deal of credit also. Because what they're doing in the production design and specifically in the script, combined with the filmmaking, is they do a lot of things that's paid off in the storytelling.
In all of his movies, there's a kind of mysticism that he was clearly trying to access, and I think what maybe David wasn't doing with camera movement, he was doing with set design.
I have to say I questioned the Ice Palace because it was so obviously not real that it sort of bounced me out of the rest of the narrative.
Anna told me to write at this desk.
But it was so utterly romantic, I suppose, is the term. I can't think of anything else. And so John Box unashamedly kind of made it, you know, look like magic. But that didn't matter. It didn't matter a damn.
David Lean often used music exceptionally well in his films, and Maurice Jarre's score in Zhivago supports everything that is trying to be told in the narrative. And Lara's theme is just universally known, whether you associate it with the movie or not.
The best example is when he's writing the poem, of course, to Lara. And as he begins the poem, he scrunches up and then he starts again. And as he hesitates while he's thinking about what he's going to write each time, so the music stops. And as the poem develops, so does the theme. I mean, it's an absolute perfect example of the use of a film score to tie into the emotional fabric of the scene. It's beautiful.
So the music steps in and guides us through that creative process. And even when the poet is blocked or interrupted, so is the music. So the music really is part of Zhivago's character.
Yuri's a poet, but we never see any of his poetry. Maurice Jarre's music is employed as a kind of interior voice for Zhivago's poetic yearnings, imaginings, longings. This is what's going through him.
It's fascinating because you're so wrapped up in the story, and the way he shoots stuff, his editing is so perfect. And there's a wonderful moment when Lara leaves him for the last time, and she's going away in the sled with Komorowski, and he's looking out the window, and he breaks the window because it's all frosted over in order to see them disappear over the horizon. And he's looking out the window, and a little piece of glass drops out of the window. And then he cuts to a signal at the railway station dropping it. I mean, just little tiny touches like that. Absolute perfection.
He must have known how ill he was. The walls of his heart were like paper, but he kept it to himself. He kept a lot to himself.
It's clear that Zhivago is not a happy person. He's never going to be a happy person. He's not happy because he's not active. And now you see that he's come back home and he's worked as a doctor and he's sickly, and we're back on the trolley. You know, he's there, he sees her, he's weak, he can't get off the trolley. It was clearly a moment of saying closure. This was the obsession of his life. This was the sense that it's something he couldn't have. And all the way through, you're looking at what he wants but can't have. He could take. He's not the kind of man that reaches out and takes it. He never could. Komorowski reaches out and takes it. He's this guy who's just so mild and observes. And she's within reach. He has a heart attack and dies. But that's not the end of the picture. The film is bookended. Starts with Alec Guinness and Rita Tushingham, and it comes back. And we really do understand that there is an evolution. This is transcendence of generations. And life goes on. Their family goes on.
This man was your father.
And that Alec Guinness, who is this cold, tough Bolshevik who is totally pragmatic, has been melted. The poems melted him.
Don't you want to believe it?
Not if it isn't true.
That's inherited.
He's looking for something, and he found it.
I can't be of any use to them now, can I?
I was hoping I might be of some use to you.
That girl represents the future of Russia. You don't understand any of that in the beginning. And it doesn't necessarily make any sense until you've seen the entire movie.
And she's got a new boyfriend. She's part of the new communist youth. And the scene, which starts in the first bookend, dark, is light.
I'm an operator.
And what do you operate?
That.
It's sunny, it's beautiful, the water looks very pure. There's this whole cleansing idea that it's going to be a new era.
There is a legacy of hope that continues. For this saga and for this struggle, life itself continues, and it's a happy ending. Something comes out of this.
Can you play the balalaika?
Can she play? She's an artist!
She's been given the gift. She's an artist. She plays the music, which signifies that life goes on. Life is bigger than communism. Things will evolve.
Then it's a gift.
Zhivago bombed the first week it opened. It got the most tepid reviews. They weren't terrible. They weren't good. I think the main criticism was it was too English. There were no Russian passions to it.
First of all, we're in the middle of the Cold War when it came out. So the Russians were considered our enemy, our arch enemy. When, of course, the perception, and probably correctly so, of Russia at the time was one of almost Stalin-type kind of existence.
She died or vanished somewhere in one of the labor camps, a nameless number on a list that was afterwards mislaid.
Russia was this dark abyss of a place that the film represented in an entirely romantic way. The whole movie, the look, the lushness of the movie, the sheer grandeur of the movie, the landscapes, everything else. I'm sure that had something to do with it.
What Lean is doing here is tremendously bold because he's taking on the Bolshevik Revolution and Russia's evolution from a czarist country into what eventually led to the Cold War at the height of the Cold War, right? And he's trying to express that in sort of balanced and human terms as much as he possibly can.
It seems you burnt the wrong village.
They always say that, and what does it matter? A village betrays us, a village is burnt. The point's made.
Your point, their village.
The studio head, Robert O'Brien, said to David, David, it's a good picture. I'm going to put $1 million into advertising it. And what happened was the musical theme got played everywhere. It captured everybody's imagination. David said, you know, the first 3 weeks you could throw boulders in the theaters and not hurt anybody. Then it caught on. Not only did it catch on, I mean, it was compared to a Russian Gone with the Wind.
I think Zhivago arguably was the last movie of its kind, almost the last to be made, and certainly the last to justify having been made in the sense of making money.
Because suddenly you'd had Bonnie and Clyde, and then later on you'd had Blow Up. I mean, the revolution was taking place on the screens, and David was old-fashioned. He refused to believe that a good story went out of fashion.
And it may be that epics also had worn out their welcome, that the audience was interested in seeing something that's a change of pace.
I think one of the reasons that filmmaking changed so much was that equipment got a lot lighter. When 35mm cameras became handheld, it was like an explosion. It got to a point where you could actually carry a soundproof camera around on your shoulder, and that changed the whole style. And there was a lot of experimentation going on that was really exciting to be part of.
I don't think Lean knew to do it another way, and I think that he was probably content to be himself and to tell his story that way. Lean wants it to feel deliberate. He's fine about it. He wants you to feel how expensive the set is, how much he built, how much he controlled the palette, how he's guiding you through this experience, how deliberate the whole thing is, how lush it is. It's a movie-going experience, and that's what you feel when you leave.
I think that he's the kind of filmmaker where whether or not at the time his movies came out, the critics supported what he was doing, or even the audience necessarily would support what he was doing, I think that he's definitely stood the test of time.
David Lean made the IMAX films of his day. That was the reason people went to the movie theater.
There's no question that David Lean inspired me to get into movies. Even when I didn't know that I wanted to get into movies, that was the touchstone. I still to this day wish I could go make David Lean movies.
If you think about the word epic in its original definition, an epic is the history of a people, and David Lean Zhivago is a genuine epic. And we're not used to that in movies anymore. And it has all the complexity of an epic novel, which is what it went after.
It really is an era and a part of the art form that sort of has died in many respects. And so I think there's a lot to learn from him.
David Lean's craft is that he is exactly that, a craftsman. His craft was at the pinnacle of cinematic technology. It's part of our history. It's part of our history of filmmaking, and it's a beautiful story.
I always watch a Lean film before I direct any film. It's just the attention to detail, a sheer perfection that he had in terms of just filmmaking. So it's really going back to school when I watch a Lean film. I just simply watch it. My mouth drops open by the end of it, and I come out just shaking my head thinking I'll never, ever be able to achieve that.
This isn't me, Yuri.
Yes, it is.
No. It's you.